I sometimes wonder if the more we talk about food additives, preservatives, and other disgusting ingredients added to processed foods, the more people will just throw their hands up and give up on trying to be healthy. Since it looks like nasty food additives are quite literally everywhere and in everything we eat. And I hope that this will inspire you to eat a more whole foods diet at the very least, even if you don't share my convictions about ultra low carb dieting and carnivore diets and related sort of diet protocols. But the food additive we're going to talk about today is something different entirely. It's actually animal-based, but it's added to meat in the grocery store, and it may be in the meat you buy, and it may not even be on the label, and it's actually pretty gross. I tell you about this with the following disclaimer. I buy the vast majority of the beef and pork I consume from local ranchers and farmers, partially because the bulk price really can't be beaten. I mean, $4.50 a pound for beef, for everything from ribeye steaks to ground beef and everything in between, is really hard to beat. But I also do that partially because I guess I have what you would call a political or ideological as well as a literally religious belief in supporting my neighbors even in economic transactions. So with that declaration of bias aside, let's take a look at the nasty ingredient that's probably added to some of the meat that you buy. It gets called meat glue by people in the know about this. Now here's an interesting article on the subject, and it's from a Reader's Digest of all places. Headline: The gross meat ingredient you're probably eating. Now, the nice thing about Reader's Digest covering something like this is that they have a very normal person target audience. People reading Reader's Digest are probably not the types who watch 5 videos a day on diet and nutrition, meaning that articles like this help to foster a food awakening among the general population, and we can take the information they provide and use it for our own purposes as long as we do it honestly. So, from the Reader's Digest article, quote, "The name suggests something not so appealing, but transglutaminase, or meat glue, is used commonly in many processed foods. Questions remain about how safe it is. The phrase meat glue is likely to elicit a few scrunched noses or raised eyebrows, and the image of gluing meat together seems entirely unappealing. But transglutaminase, or TG, or meat glue as it's commonly called, is used in many processed foods today. However, it's a controversial food additive. Indeed, in 2010, the European Union banned its use, according to Food Safety News, but the United States Department of Agriculture, the USDA, still allows it. And the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, classifies meat glue as, quote, generally recognized as safe. Actually, in the United States, we still use a lot of ingredients that are banned in other countries, and I will continue to talk about that in future videos. Meat glue, or transglutaminase, is an enzyme that is found naturally in humans, animals, and plants. It can form bonds between different types of proteins or different pieces of protein, which is why it's been given the nickname, quote, nature's biological glue. These enzymes have several purposes, and they don't all involve meat products. Indeed, TG can be used in baked goods and dairy. Meat glue is made from cultivated bacteria from blood plasma from pigs and cows, says Rebecca Park, registered nurse from New York City and the creator of remediesforme.com. Other meat glues are made from cultivated bacteria from vegetables and plant extracts. Meat glues are mixed with other ingredients such as gelatin and caseinate." End quote. Okay, so what's the big deal? It's a processed food ingredient that is derived at least in part from animal products, at least most of the time, but then subjected to lab conditions and exposed to all sorts of fun chemicals to make sure the plasma and blood products result in a gluey consistency that can be consistently used in the manufacture and distribution of industrial food products. So what's it used for? Well, to make food look more uniform. So think hot dogs, chicken nuggets, and a few other items. Quote, "With the help of transglutaminase, small pieces of meat can be found together to create larger, more uniform pieces," says Isabel Montemayor, RD, Nutrition Director at Fresh and Lean. "It has been used to develop or improve the texture of a variety of products such as sausages, chicken nuggets, imitation crab, bread, and cheese." Pork tenderloin is a good example of how TG can be used. This cut of meat is naturally cone-shaped, with a broader, thick end that tapers to a smaller, narrower one. With transglutaminase, meat producers can glue multiple pork tenderloins together to create a tenderloin that has uniform shape and size. This might be ideal in restaurants or catering companies where having even equal sizes is preferred." End quote. If you like pork tenderloin, you may want to try to get it locally because they don't look uniform. Thankfully, 0.016% or 8 million pounds of meat consumed in America uses this enzyme, but pork loin is a favorite among those on ketogenic diets, as well as carnivores who eat pork because it's both, at least with pork tenderloin, it's both good tasting but also relatively lean and is easy and cheap way to add protein to a meal without adding more fat, especially when you start talking about things like pork, which some people have concerns about the fatty acid profile of. And yes, there are times when a person may want more protein without the fat, and a pork tenderloin is a cheap way to do it. And I've encountered meat glue myself, though I at the time didn't know it. I've had times where pork tenderloin that I bought at a grocery store, as well as chicken breasts, mysteriously fell apart during the cooking process, when the whole muscle from the animal shouldn't have had that happen. The glue gave way, likely under the low and slow cooking conditions that I tend to favor when I make various meat dishes, and especially when I make pork tenderloin, I tend to like to throw it in my pellet grill so it gets a nice smoky flavor. Now, how do you tell if the food you eat has this ingredient in it, and is it safe? According to that article, quote, "The USDA requires meat, egg, and poultry producers to list transglutaminase on ingredient labels, but they don't always have to write the word out in such clear terms. You may see TG enzyme, or TGP enzyme used. If the food you're holding has used the enzyme at any point in the manufacturing process, the food should also be labeled as formed or, quote, reformed meat. The USDA and FDA both agree that meat glue is safe. However, some researchers and food experts have raised concerns. The biggest concern, and ultimately the reason the EU banned the enzyme, is bacterial contamination. Each time proteins are, quote, glued together, the risk for introducing more bacteria, such as E. coli, goes up. The risk of food poisoning in food that is glued together is extremely high, Park says. This is because the smaller pieces of meats used have had a chance to grow bacteria before they are glued together. The glued meat may also be harder to cook, which increases the risk for foodborne illness. If heating can't kill the potentially harmful bacteria, you could become sick more easily. TG might be okay, but though these food additives are harmful. For other products, including breads and dairy, the label may be less clear. If you're unsure about the food you're buying, contact a manufacturer. According to a 2016 study in Autoimmunity Reviews, individuals with a gluten sensitivity or celiac disease may need to avoid foods made with TG. That's because the enzyme may increase the allergic load in the body, which could cause severe and serious reactions. People with weakened immune systems, digestive diseases, food allergies, and sensitivities may be advised to avoid all foods with TG and stick to whole, unprocessed meats. End quote. So there are real concerns here, and they don't mention generally histamine responses, but they did kind of describe it. So I'd suggest that if you have random histamine responses to certain cuts of meat, but not from other meats of the same type, like some cuts of pork do it to you, but not others, then the cause may be a sensitivity of these kinds to either the meat glue itself or the bacteria trapped on the surface before the meat is glued to the cut in question. And it's not just pork either. I've had beef tenderloins fall apart in the same way, so I'm certain they use it on beef. But it is interesting that as soon as the ingredient is applied to chicken breast, pork loin, or other meat, the instantly gets that meat classified as a processed food. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway here. But I'm curious about your experience with meat glue. Do you have a sensitivity to this ingredient or to foods treated and formed with this ingredient? Do you think this is a silly thing to do to pork loin, since the only reason they use it is for cosmetic purposes? Are you a little weirded out that it finds its way into pastries? Let me know in the comments. Please like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help, as does sharing this on social media. That helps a lot too. I'm Anthony Stine, the Practical Carnivore, and thanks for tuning in today.